The crazy mountains do not just rise from the Montana dirt. They erupt like a jagged and broken tooth of granite and limestone against a sky that feels far too wide to be comforting. This is a place of vertical scree and deadfall that swallows the sound of a human scream before it even leaves the throat. To the Crow tribe, these were the Awakkola, the mountains of the dreamers, a place where the veil between what we know and what we fear is worn thin by the wind. I have spent decades staring at topographical maps of this range, and the lines start to look like the ridges of a cold and indifferent brain. It is a labyrinth. It is a trap. And in September of 2014, it became the final resting place of a man who should have known better. But perhaps in the end, knowledge is no shield against the things that move in the silence. Aaron Hedges was 38 years old, and he was built for the high country. He was not a tourist in flip-flops, or a weekend warrior with a brand new compass. He was a hunter. He was a man who understood the weight of a pack and the necessity of fire. On the morning of September 7, 2014, Aaron set out with two companions for a week-long elk hunt in the northern Crazies. They had horses, and they had gear, and they had the kind of confidence that only comes from years of successful excursions into the wild. They were headed for a cache of supplies they had dropped off earlier in the year. But the mountain has a way of shifting its geometry when you are not looking. Aaron got separated. He told his friends he was going to head toward the cache on his own. It was a simple decision, a routine move. But in these cases, the routine is often the first step into a nightmare. The weather in Montana does not change so much as it attacks. By the time Aaron was reported missing, a wall of white had moved over the peaks. Snow began to fall, in heavy and suffocating curtains, turning the world into a featureless void of gray and white. Search and rescue teams were mobilized, but they were fighting a ghost. They looked for the orange of a vest or the dark shape of a man against the snow, but the mountain offered nothing but silence. The wind howled through the canyons with a frequency that sounds like human voices if you listen long enough. It is a phenomenon called auditory pareidolia, but when you are out there in the dark, it feels like something else. It feels like the mountain is talking to itself. Days bled into a week. The search grew to include helicopters with thermal imaging and dozens of ground searchers with dogs. They focused on the area between where Aaron was last seen and the supply cache. It was logical. It was scientific. And it was completely wrong. The dogs could not find a scent. The thermal cameras saw only the cold. It was as if Aaron Hedges had simply ceased to occupy physical space. When you study these cases, you start to notice a recurring theme. The person goes missing in a high-probability zone, but they are never found there. They are found in places that defy the physical capabilities of a human being under duress. 9 days after he vanished, a breakthrough came. But it was the kind of discovery that only deepens the dread. Searchers found Aaron's boots and his water bladder. They were located miles away from his last known position in an area that made no tactical sense for a hunter trying to survive. The boots were sitting there side by side. Think about the physical reality of that. You are in the high country of Montana. The temperature is plummeting. The ground is a brutal mixture of sharp shale and freezing mud. And you take off your boots. The traditional explanation is paradoxical, undressing due to hypothermia, where the brain misinterprets the final stages of freezing as a sensation of burning heat. But that does not explain why the boots were found where they were. It does not explain how a man walks miles across that terrain in his stocking feet without leaving a trail of blood or shredded fabric. I have seen the photos of those boots. They look lonely. They look like they were left behind by someone who no longer needed to walk on the earth. There is a specific kind of stillness in the air when you find an item like that. It is a microscopic observation of a life, interrupted. You look at the wear on the leather and the laces that were untied by human hands, and you realize that the person who wore them was in a state of mind that we cannot possibly map. Was he being followed? Was he being led? Or was he simply caught in the grip of something that distorts the human perception of direction and distance? We call it the blur. It is that moment when the woods stop being a collection of trees and start being a single predatory entity. The search was eventually scaled back as the snow deepened and the hope of a rescue turned into the grim reality of a recovery. The family was left in that terrible liminal space where the person is neither dead nor alive, just gone. It took nearly a year for the next piece of the puzzle to surface. In June of the following year, a rancher on the Sunlight Ranch, which sits on the opposite side of the mountain range, found Aaron's backpack and his bow. Again, the location was impossible. To get from where the boots were found to where the pack was found, Aaron would have had to climb over a massive snow-covered ridge and descend into a completely different drainage. He would have had to do this without boots. In the middle of a blizzard, the backpack was found propped up against a tree. His bow was leaning nearby. These were not the discarded items of a man in a panic. They were placed with intention. When you look at the distance and the elevation gain required to make that journey, the math stops working. A man in peak physical condition, with full gear and clear weather, would find that trek exhausting. A man who is freezing and barefoot should find it impossible. Yet there the items were. It is as if he were being moved by a force that does not obey the laws of friction or fatigue. There are theories about magnetic anomalies in the crazy mountains, pockets of space where GPS units fail and compasses spin. Some say it is the geology. Others say it is something far older that lives in the rock. Finally, in August of 2015, his remains were found. They were discovered less than half a mile from the Sunlight Ranch house. He was so close to safety. He was within sight of a place where he could have found warmth and help. But he never made it to the door. His body was found in a patch of thick brush hidden away as if he were trying to disappear from something. The searchers had passed near this area dozens of times. The rancher lived there every day. How do you miss a body that close to a habitation? It is a common thread in these disappearances. The missing are often found in areas that have been searched repeatedly, or in spots so close to civilization that it seems insulting they weren't found sooner. When the medical examiner looked at what was left of Aaron Hedges, there were no clear answers. No broken bones that suggested a fall. No obvious signs of animal predation that occurred while he was alive. Just the silent testimony of a man who had walked a path that shouldn't exist. I think about the last hours of his life. I think about him crouching in that brush, looking at the lights of the ranch house, and for some reason being unable to move toward them. Was there something standing between him and that door? Was the air different there? There are reports in these high-altitude cases of a sudden crushing silence. A feeling of being watched by eyes that are not human. The crazy mountains keep their secrets buried under layers of scree and time. The case of Aaron Hedges is a chilling reminder that we are only guests in the wilderness, and sometimes the host is not welcoming. We like to think that with our satellite phones and our nylon gear we have conquered the dark. But the dark is patient. It waited for Aaron to be alone. It waited for the snow to fall. And then it led him on a journey that defies every logic of survival. You can call it a tragic accident. You can call it hypothermia. But those are just words we use to stop ourselves from screaming at the sheer impossibility of the facts. This pattern of impossible movement and discarded clothing is not unique to Montana. It echoes the disappearance of Jaryd Atadero in the Rocky Mountain National Park, a 3-year-old boy who vanished and whose remains were found years later on a cliff face that an adult would struggle to climb. It mirrors the case of Keith Parkins in Nevada, a young boy who traveled dozens of miles across mountain ranges in a matter of hours. A feat that should have been physically impossible for his age and size. There is a consistency to these anomalies that suggests a predatory intelligence or a recurring glitch in our physical reality. We are looking for people, but perhaps we should be looking for the holes they fall through. Aaron Hedges is gone, but the mountains are still there. They are standing in the Montana wind, jagged and indifferent, waiting for the next person to step off the trail. When you go into the woods, you should feel a small prickle of fear on the back of your neck. That is not paranoia. That is your DNA, remembering a time when we were not at the top of the food chain. It is a warning. Listen to it. Because once the mountain decides you belong to it, there is no map in the world that can lead you home. The silence in the crazy mountains is not the absence of sound. It is a presence. It is the sound of the earth breathing. And sometimes, if you are very quiet and very alone, you can hear it calling your name. But whatever you do, do not follow the voice. Do not take off your boots. And do not think for a second that you are the one in control. We are all just walking on the edge of a shadow, and the shadow is getting longer every day. The wind in the crazy mountains does not just blow. It carves. It is a persistent wheezing lung that exhales the scent of ancient stone and frozen pine needles into every crevice of your clothing. In September of 2014, that wind carried something else. It carried the silence of a man who should have known better, a man named Aaron Hedges who walked into the jagged teeth of the Montana wilderness and simply ceased to be. We are taught from a young age that the world is a mapped and measured place, that the satellite eyes in the sky see everything, but that is a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. The truth is much colder and far more jagged. The truth is that there are pockets of this earth where the map dissolves into static, where the compass needle spins in a frantic dance of confusion, and where a seasoned hunter can lose his soul in the space between two heartbeats. Aaron was 47 years old, a man of substance and experience who understood the weight of a rifle and the shifting moods of the high country. He was not a tourist in flip-flops wandering off a paved trail. He was equipped with the best gear that modern industry could provide, draped in high-performance camouflage and carrying the confidence of 1,000 successful treks. He was hunting with friends near a place called Sunlight Lake, a name that suggests warmth and clarity, but in reality is nothing more than a basin of shadows and freezing water. When he decided to peel away from his companions to find a different vantage point, he was not committing a fatal error in his own mind. He was merely moving through the woods. But the woods have a way of shifting when you are not looking. The trees move closer. The landmarks you memorized 3 minutes ago begin to look like alien geometries. By the time the sun began its slow, bruised descent toward the horizon on that first evening, the air had turned into a wetting stone. The temperature did not just drop, it collapsed. Aaron was missing, and the mountains began to swallow the evidence of his passage with a fresh dusting of snow. When the search parties finally mobilized, they expected to find a man hunkered down under a cedar deadfall, or perhaps a man with a broken ankle waiting for the hum of a helicopter. They did not expect to find a trail of breadcrumbs that defied the laws of physics and the logic of human survival. They found his backpack in a location that made no sense, miles away from his last known position, resting on a slope as if it had been placed there by a giant hand. The nylon was pristine, the buckles still snapped shut, yet the man who owned it was nowhere to be found in the frozen radius of that discarded shell. Think about the physical act of removing a heavy pack in a sub-zero environment. You are losing your lifeline. Your food, your extra layers, your very means of staying upright in the face of the void. You do not drop your pack unless you are certain you no longer need it, or unless something has convinced you that the weight is a terminal burden. The searchers looked at that pack, and they felt the first cold prickle of the impossible. The ground around the bag showed no signs of a struggle, no dragging marks, no blood. It was just a hollow husk of a man's life sitting in the dirt. As the day stretched into a week, the weather turned into a wall of white noise. The searchers, hundreds of them, crawled over the scree and through the thickets of Devil's Club, their infrared cameras seeing nothing but the cold heat of the earth itself. Then came the boots. This is the detail that keeps the investigators awake, staring at the ceiling until the sun comes up. One boot was found miles away from the pack. Then the other. They were not scattered by scavengers. They were not torn. They were removed. Imagine the sensation of bare skin pressing into the frozen Montana soil, the crystals of ice biting into the soles of the feet, the numbness creeping upward like a slow poison. There is a clinical term called paradoxical undressing, a final stage of hypothermia where the brain misfires and tells the freezing body that it is burning up. The victim strips off their clothes in a delirious attempt to cool down before they expire. But that does not explain why Aaron's gear was found in such a calculated linear progression across terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. It does not explain the distance. The distance is the glitch in the system. Aaron Hedges traveled over 10 miles across some of the most punishing vertical terrain in the lower 48 states. To do this in the dark in a snowstorm without boots is a feat that moves beyond the realm of human endurance and into the territory of the supernatural. It is as if he were being moved by something, or as if the space between point A and point B had folded like a piece of paper. He was moving toward a ranch house, a place of safety with lights that could be seen from the ridges. He was so close. He was within sight of the very door that would have meant life, warmth, and a story to tell his grandchildren. But he stopped. He sat down in the dirt within a stone's throw of salvation, and he let the mountain have him. Why? Why would a man who had fought through miles of frozen hell stop when the finish line was in sight? There are those who speak of the crushing silence, a phenomenon reported by survivors of near disappearances in the high altitudes. They describe a moment where the sound of the world simply cuts out. No wind, no birds, no rustle of leaves. Just a heavy pressurized vacuum that feels like being underwater. In that silence, they say, comes a feeling of immense predatory weight. A sense that the air itself has become hostile, and that moving toward the light is no longer an option because something is standing in the doorway. Something that does not have a face. Something that belongs to the mountains, the way the granite belongs to the mountains. When they finally found Aaron's remains years later, they were in a spot that had been searched multiple times. This is another recurring motif in these cases. The body appears in a location that was previously cleared as if it had been returned from somewhere else. His bones were scattered bleached white by the high-altitude sun, picked clean by the local fauna. But the bones do not tell the story of the mind. They do not explain the terror of those final hours or the reason he discarded his thermal layers. The investigators look at the maps, and they see a straight line of travel that should have been impossible. They see a man who bypassed easier routes to take the most difficult path imaginable. They see a puzzle where the pieces have been shaved down so they no longer fit together. We like to pretend that we understand the wild. We give the peaks names and we build trails and we put up signs. But the crazy mountains are not a park. They are an entity. They are a collection of ancient indifferent forces that do not recognize the sovereignty of a human being. When Aaron Hedges stepped off the edge of the known world, he entered a space where the rules of biology and physics are merely suggestions. You can call it a tragic accident. You can call it the delirium of the cold. But those are just blankets we wrap around ourselves to keep from shivering. The reality is that Aaron was taken by a process we cannot define, a mechanism of the earth that occasionally reaches out and plucks a soul from the surface of the map. This pattern of impossible movement and the calculated shedding of gear is a ghost that haunts the archives of the national parks. It is the same shadow that fell over the case of Jaryd Atadero in the Rocky Mountains. A 3-year-old boy who vanished in the blink of an eye while hiking with a group of adults. Years later, his tiny tooth and a single scrap of his clothing were found thousands of feet above the trail on a vertical cliff face. No mountain lion carries a child that high without leaving a drop of blood. No 3-year-old climbs a wall of rock that would stop a professional mountaineer. It is the same impossible elevation gain, the same nonsensical placement of remains, the same mocking silence from the terrain itself. Then there is the case of Keith Parkins in Nevada. A young boy who walked away from his grandfather's ranch and was found nearly 20 miles away, having crossed 2 mountain ranges and multiple fences in less than half a day. He was found alive, face down in the dirt in a state of catatonic shock. When asked how he got there, he had no answer. He had traveled a distance that would have required a sustained running pace of a marathon athlete, yet he was a toddler in a jacket. These are not accidents. These are anomalies. They are glitches in the fabric of our reality, where the distance between 2 points becomes zero, or where something carries the victim across the landscape with a speed and a purpose that defies our understanding of the natural world. Aaron Hedges is now a name on a file, a cautionary tale whispered in hunting camps around a dying fire. His boots are likely still sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, the leather cracked and the laces stiff with the memory of the frost. But the mountains are still out there. They are standing tonight under the cold Montana stars, jagged and hungry. They do not care about your GPS. They do not care about your experience. They are waiting for the next person to feel that sudden, crushing silence. They are waiting for the moment you decide to take off your pack and walk into the dark. We are not the masters of this world. We are just the visitors who haven't been caught yet. The story of Aaron Hedges remains an open wound in the history of the crazy mountains because it refuses to be solved by simple logic. Every time an investigator tries to pin it down to a standard case of exposure, they hit the wall of the boots. They hit the wall of the distance. They hit the wall of the ranch house lights that were never reached. It is a mystery that suggests the existence of a predator that does not eat meat, but consumes the very essence of a person's orientation and will. A predator made of wind and shadow and the folding of space. When you go into the high country, remember that the silence is not your friend. It is a predator's breath held in anticipation. The mountains are old, and they have seen many men like Aaron Hedges. They have seen them come with their steel and their fire, and they have seen them leave as nothing more than white calcium under the summer sun. The mystery is not that people get lost. The mystery is how they get found in places they could never have reached. It is the pattern of the impossible that should terrify us. It is the realization that the wilderness is not just a place, but a presence that can reach out and touch you, and once it has your scent, there is no trail that leads back to the world you knew. Consider the case of Danny Philippidis, the firefighter who disappeared from a ski resort in New York and woke up 6 days later in California, still wearing his ski boots and helmet with no memory of how he traveled 3,000 miles. There was no record of him buying a plane ticket, no credit card trail, nothing. He simply was in one place and then he was in another. The world is full of these holes. These gaps in the narrative where people fall through the cracks of the known and emerge on the other side, if they emerge at all, as broken versions of themselves. Aaron Hedges did not make it to the other side. He stayed in the gap. He stayed in the crazy mountains, a permanent part of the silence that waits for us all. The shadows are growing longer now, and the air is getting thin. If you listen closely, you can hear the mountains breathing. They are not calling you home. They are just waiting for you to get tired. They are waiting for you to sit down. They are waiting for you to take off your boots and step into the impossible. Do not look back at the lights of the ranch house. They are further away than they look. And the thing standing in the dark between you and that door has been waiting for a very, very long time.